In Yemen, Houthi forces of the Ansarallah movement confirmed Wednesday the launching of 3 missiles against Israeli military installations. In the United Nations headquarters in New York, members of the United Nations Security Council met to discuss the situation in the Middle East. And Nepal declared 3 days of mourning and reported that the rains that hit the country last weekend caused losses of $127 million, in addition to the death of at least 238 people. Hello and welcome to From the South. I'm Alejandra Garcia from TeleSUR Studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Yemen, Houthi forces of the Ansarallah movement confirmed Wednesday the launching of 3 missiles against Israeli military installations. A Houthi movement spokesman stated that the intended targets were hit and expressed their support of Iran's attack against Israel as part of the Iranian nation's right to self-defense. Furthermore, the movement confirmed the launching of drones against military targets in the Israeli cities of Tel Aviv and Eilat. Since November 2023, Houthi forces launched attacks in the Red Sea against Israeli ships and those of their allies in solidarity with the Gaza Strip in the face of the aggression of the Zionist occupier.
The criminal Netanyahu continues his large and dangerous project, committing crimes and terrorism against the Palestinian and Lebanese people. The blood that is being shed is pure and innocent, and the Israeli criminal Netanyahu must be punished for it. If he does not stop these actions and crimes, the Islamic resistance and the Axis of Resistance will take it upon themselves to deter him from these terrorist actions.
A memorial ceremony was held in Yemen for martyred Hezbollah Secretary General Sayed Hassan Nasrallah. President Mahdi al-Mishad addressed several officials and citizens in the capital Sana'a and affirmed that the Axis of Resistance is united and will confront all conspiracies despite the immense pain caused by the assassination of the leader. The Yemeni government assured that Hassan Nasrallah was a leader loved by the majority of the Yemeni people and the Arab and Islamic peoples. For his part, the head of the Supreme Political Council pointed out that the response of Lebanon, Yemen and Iraq against the Israeli occupation was welcomed by the free peoples of the world.
The response that came from Lebanon, Yemen and Iraq to the enemy entity, and what we saw from Iran was a torrent of missiles that delighted all the free peoples of the world. The blood of the martyr, Commander Hassan Nasrallah, will sweep away the entity of the Zionist enemy.
The Lebanese resistance movement Hezbollah inflicted heavy losses on Israeli troops attempting to infiltrate into southern Lebanon. The group reported that during the early hours of Wednesday morning, it ambushed an Israeli infantry force attempting to advance towards the town of Odessa, causing casualties and forcing the invading army to withdraw. Israeli media informed that 4 soldiers were killed and 20 others were wounded in what they called a serious security incident. These are the first clashes on the ground since the Israeli army announced Monday night that it was launching an operation in southern Lebanon. Following on the escalation of tensions on the Middle East on Wednesday, Israel launched new airstrikes on densely populated areas in the south of Beirut. The latest bombing caused the massive destruction of residential buildings and infrastructure and in the neighborhood of Shija in the southern region of the Lebanese capital, with no casualties being reported so far. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, more than 1,000 people have been killed in Israeli attacks since September 17th, almost a quarter of them women and children, while hundreds of thousands of people have fled their homes and are sleeping on beaches and streets. Palestinian authorities denounced that in the last 24 hours, Israeli forces committed 5 massacres, leaving 51 dead and 165 wounded in the Gaza Strip. Medical sources reported over 40 deaths in Khan Younis, including 12 family members after Israeli troops conducted an hour-long ground incursion backed by artillery fire. Attacks were further registered in the north and center of the devastated Palestinian enclave, so the number of casualties could be higher. Meanwhile, Israeli occupying forces said on Wednesday that they have dropped bombs on a third school in the Gaza Strip, allegedly used by the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas, after 2 other schools were hit last night by Israeli aircrafts. On Wednesday, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian warned that his country could give Israel a far stronger response if Tel Aviv continues its military operations in Lebanon.
European countries and the U.S. must put this criminal, Israel, in its rightful place in a way that it stops doing such things. Because if it wants to continue, it's not that simple. Next time, if it does something to disrupt our security, we are able to disrupt their security. Definitely, if they want to do something wrong, they will receive a far stronger response than what was demonstrated last night. The Iron Dome they have built is not made of iron, it's more fragile than glass. The world must be able to punish such an apartheid, genocidal regime.
The Russian foreign minister said Moscow is extremely concerned by the latest escalation in the Middle East and accused the United States of bearing a significant share of responsibility for the degradation of the situation.
I would like to underline again that Moscow is extremely concerned about a new dangerous round of escalation in the Middle East. We have repeatedly warned that the failure to resolve a number of crises in this part of the world, primarily the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, is fraught with a large-scale aggravation of the situation. We believe that the United States of America bears a significant share of responsibility, not only in the historical context as a whole, but the United States also and especially bears responsibility for the degradation in the current situation.
Following the escalation in tensions in the Middle East, the Venezuelan government has issued a communique in support of the Iranian nation right to defend itself from the Israeli attacks on the region. The official document states, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is following in details the recent events in the Middle East that have prompted an action by the Islamic Republic of Iran, invoking its right to legitimate self-defense as set forth in Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations in response to the threats and crimes against humanity committed by the Netanyahu regime against Palestine, Lebanon, and the Iranian people, including violations of their sovereignty and territorial integrity and the murder of innocent civilians as well as political and military leaders of these countries. It follows the inaction shown by the United Nations Security Council, paralyzed by the veto exercised in a complicit manner by the United States of America that has prevented the aggressions from stopping and Netanyahu non-compliance with international law, which continues to be the greatest threat to security in the region. It is urgent to stop the escalation of war by Israel in the entire region and to determine its responsibilities in the war crimes committed by its government. To conclude, the communique states, the Bolivarian government of Venezuela urges the international community to mobilize in order to restore legality and stop the genocide against the Palestinian people in Lebanon, as well as the unbridled race to take control of the region by Israel and the United States of America, which has had serious consequences for international peace and stability. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. In the United Nations headquarters in New York, members of the United Nations Security Council met on Wednesday to discuss the situation in the Middle East. During the emergency meeting, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for an end to the sickening cycle of escalation in the region, where tensions escalate between Israel, Iran, Lebanon, and Yemen, and as the Zionist regime continues its genocide in Palestine. In this context, Guterres stated that this deadly cycle of tit-for-tat violence must stop, adding that raging fires in the Middle East are fast becoming an inferno. Furthermore, the Secretary General stressed that the safety and security of all United Nations personnel must be ensured and said the United Nations interim force in Lebanon will remain in position. In Mexico, President Claudia Sheinbaum informed she will continue the daily morning press conferences introduced by former head of state Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Precisely, Sheinbaum's first mañanera was dedicated to remember and condemn the massacre committed on October 2, 1968 in Tlatelolco Square against a student movement that demanded freedom and democracy.
Today, on the day of the first Mañanera morning conference, on the second stage of the fourth transformation, we are going to dedicate it to October the 2nd, because October the 2nd cannot be forgotten. 56 years ago, in Tlatelolco Square, after a student movement which demanded freedom, which demanded democracy, freedom for political prisoners, one of the greatest atrocities in history that took place in Mexico in the second half of the 20th century was perpetrated. It was ordered by the then President of the Republic, Díaz Ordaz, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The repression against the students who, in freedom and asking for public dialogue that had been offered, were assassinated, imprisoned.
Argentina's public universities hold a massive demonstration on Wednesday backed by unions and opposition parties to protest sharp public spending cuts implemented by President Javier Milei. Despite a heavy police operation, thousands of people gathered around the Argentine Congress as part of a federal university march in defense of free, inclusive and quality public education. Members of social, trade union and human rights organizations, students, teachers and citizens in general arrived at the legislative seat from different parts of this city and the province of Buenos Aires, while other regions of the country held other demonstrations. The President of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, has boosted in the Youth in Peace program since January 1, 2023 to prevent youngsters from joining criminal groups. The government program provides 1 million Colombian pesos per month to young people nationwide who live in extreme poverty conditions to help them study or for them to open their own businesses. Lately, President Petro urged youngsters to work for a higher life quality and unity in order to counter the over 55,000 suicide attempts of young people and decrease their participation in criminal actions as well. One of the beneficiaries of the Youth in Peace program shared his experience.
It is very difficult to live in the Alberto Lares Camargo neighborhood hit by violence. Why is that? Because I've known what a gun is and what a bullet is since I was a little boy, and it is not easy, and today people think that it does not leave long-term effects, but it does. I have been able to invest the resources from the Youth in Peace program in this stationery store business to generate income not only for myself but also for my family, and in the near future, we hope to expand this and create opportunities for other young people like me.
In the United States, the vice presidential debate between the main party's candidates took place on Tuesday night, just 5 weeks before Election Day. The encounter followed last month's face-off between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, with both vice presidential hopefuls, Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance, focusing their criticisms on their opponents' running mates. The policy-heavy discussion touched on the U.S. response to the Middle East tensions, the devastation caused by Hurricane Helene, gun violence and migration issues, among other topics like reproductive health. With the November 5th election day fast approaching, the debate may be the last of the 2024 presidential campaign. Also in the United States, thousands of dock workers continue to strike over wage increases and automation at ports. At least 14 ports across the country have been on strike since early Tuesday morning. More than 50,000 members of International Longshoremen's Association along the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico condemned the automation of the ports, considering that it will lead to job losses. Experts say this strike could have an impact on Kamala Harris' candidacy ahead of the presidential election. We have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at TeleSUR English, there you'll be able to rewatch our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break, don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. On Tuesday, the government of Nepal declared 3 days of mourning and reported that the rains that hit the country last weekend caused losses of $127 million, in addition to the death of at least 238 people. A preliminary report submitted by the Nepalese government indicates that 1,769 houses and 55 bridges were destroyed as a result of the floods and landslide caused by the rains. In addition to these affections, 37 roads were damaged, several of which connected Kathmandu with the rest of the country, resulting in the partial isolation of the city. Moreover, in addition to the deceased, the Nepalese police reported that 29 people are still missing, while the government informed that search and rescue operations are still underway, with the participation of more than 30,000 troops. In Afghanistan, authorities reported at least 13 people dead following recent floods that hit several regions of the country. The National Disaster Management Authority informed that during the intense rains of the last days, 16 people were injured in 8 states of the country due to landslides. It also detailed that more than 100 houses were totally destroyed and more than 650 hectares of croplands were damaged. In this regard, emergency teams continue to carry out relief and rescue works for families affected by the natural disaster. On Wednesday, Chinese authorities ordered the closure of schools and financial markets ahead of Typhoon Krathon. Weather authorities forecast the phenomenon will bring about strong winds and heavy rainfall. In this context, 22 counties and regions of the Chinese island of Taiwan suspended school and administrative activities. Authorities also canceled all domestic and dozens of international flights. In the city of Taitung, at least 23 people were injured, one of them is seriously, while 2,735 people were evacuated. Since Wednesday morning, the typhoon has been weakening to a moderate typhoon. In Greece, authorities report the death of 2 people due to forest fires in the Corinthia region. The Civil Protection Department stated that more than 2,000 people were temporarily evacuated in 13 localities throughout the region. Around 575 fighters are engaged in the firefighting operation, using 160 trucks, 6 helicopters and 4 air tankers. The blaze is moving towards the south and east of the country and has so far consumed more than 6,400 hectares. The Bolivian government reported that forest fires have ravaged 7 million hectares of forestry and pasture after more than 3 months of fires. President Luis Arce decreed a national disaster situation due to the forest fires that are mainly affecting the Santa Cruz department. In this context, the government requested the approval of 2 credits of $325 million in the Plurinational Legislative Assembly to face the flames. Authorities described the fires in Santa Cruz as the greatest environmental disaster experienced in this region. On Wednesday, the Gabonese government claimed sovereignty over 3 islands in oil-rich waters before the International Court of Justice at The Hague. This way, the Gabonese authorities argued they reached the sovereignty of the islands by the already established 1974 Bada Convention. However, Equatorial Guinea disregards the claim, recognizing as legal the agreement sealed between French and Spanish colonial powers in 1900. Furthermore, Equatorial Guinean officials assure Gabon invaded the islands in 1972, occupying them illegally ever since. As a result, both nations agreed on finding out an amicable solution, allowing the ICJ to decide whether the claim is valid to define the legal right over the disputed territory. The Gabonese representative expressed her view on the case.
It is therefore up to you, ladies and gentlemen of the court, to determine whether the Bada Agreement is binding on the parties. If it is, the die is cast. This treaty, which in our view is fully valid, resolves all the problems of sovereignty over the islands and the demarcation of borders.
The French National Assembly's Law Committee overwhelmingly rejected a motion for the impeachment of President Emmanuel Macron tabled by the La France Insoumise, which criticizes the head of state for not respecting the results of the legislative elections.
Ladies and gentlemen, 69 votes were cast and 69 votes were returned, giving a majority of 35 for 15 against 54. Thank you very much.
We have come to the end of this news brief, but you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net and join us on social media. We are on Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Alejandra Garcia. Thank you for watching.